This video is made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.
Kirby and the Forgotten Land is coming to Switch on March 25th, and it looks like one of the most exciting Kirby games in a long time. After years of side-scrolling adventures, the 30-year-old pink puffball is going to full 3D. Maybe, just maybe, this brave new dimension of Kirby has you interested in the series, or you just want a way to tap into that Kirby dopamine while we wait for Forgotten Land to come out. Here's 6 games to play that are, at a minimum, reasonably accessible, at least for now, since the Wii U and the 3DS eShops are shutting down in 2023. Sorry, Kirby Air Ride, I love you with all my heart, and you're an underrated gem, but you're like $50 minimum on the resale market and only available on GameCube. So, let's go on with the list. If you're going to go back to the origins of Kirby, the Super Nintendo version of Kirby Superstar, which is available on Nintendo Switch Online, among various other places, is the way to go. The original Dreamland Game Boy games are very cute, and the NES Kirby's Adventure is excellent for its era, but Superstar is a tour de force, and also pays homage to some of the older games. It's the best summation of 90s Kirby, collecting everything novel about the series in its first few years, while also adding new elements such as co-op and the computer-controlled helper partners. This is also where his trademark copy abilities were more fleshed out for the very first time, with different controls tied to button presses and directional holding. It's almost like a proto-Smash Bros., which makes sense because shortly after this, Kirby creator Masahiro Sakurai literally made Super Smash Bros. On Nintendo 64. But what really makes Superstar stand out, even to this day, is the fact that it actually includes 9 different games in one package. They largely all share controls and gameplay, but each one provides a unique wrinkle. There's Spring Breeze, which is a lighthearted remake of sorts of Kirby's Game Boy debut, Kirby's Dream Land. Dynablade ups the difficulty a little bit, while also adding more complexity in terms of a world map. Gourmet Race is a time trial race against King Dedede. Things start to get more involved and interesting with the other 3 traditional Kirby games. The Great Cave Offensive is a large maze where you look for secrets and treasures. 60 in total. The cave is split into 4 different areas, all featuring a boss and a save point. This is one of the weirder games in this collection as well, since the treasures you collect are littered with obvious Nintendo references, such as the Screw Attack from Metroid, Captain Falcon's helmet, Mr. Saturn from Earthbound, and even the Triforce. There's also a computer boss that is a turn-based battle, which didn't really strike me as all that weird when I was a kid, but it's increasingly more bizarre now. The next game is Revenge of Meta Knight, which is a cheesy cinematic thrill ride where Kirby boards Meta Knight's ship the Halberd, and thwarts his attempt to take over Dreamland. There's dialogue between the baddies throughout levels, and contrary to Great Cave Offensive, more of a linear path from start to finish, emphasized more by the ever-present time limit. It also has the delightfully silly named boss, Heavy Lobster, that makes me crack a smile when I think about how the powers that be in Kirby Land were just like, make a lobster robot and call it Heavy Lobster. I hope the Lobster Bot comes back in Forgotten Land. The last major game is Milky Way Wishes, which is also the biggest. It's weirdly non-traditional for a Kirby game, so you don't need to inhale enemies, but instead collect copy essences so you can cycle through them as needed. The boss is the jester named Marks, who made his triumphant return, at least outside of small cameos, as a playable dream friend in Kirby Star Allies. More on that later. A few sundry other modes, like a boss rush and some timing-based minigames, make up the rest of Kirby Superstar. It's wild how much game got packed into this 1996 Super Nintendo adventure, and there's good reason why this is considered one of Kirby's best outings. Kirby Superstar Ultra did come out on DS in 2008, but unlike some other Kirby games from that era, it never came out on any digital platforms after. If you can get your hands on Ultra, go for it. It's an excellent expanded port with many new modes, and even a challenging and lengthy replay of all the original games with Meta Knight. I might have said that Kirby Superstar was the best summation of 90s Kirby, but that's not entirely true because a year after that game's release came Kirby's Dream Land 3, which is the unsung hero of that era that you likely have had access to for years but never picked up. For the record, it's on Nintendo Switch Online, in case that was a little too subtle. Dream Land 3 is an extremely late-gen Super Nintendo game. It came out more than a year after the Nintendo 64 launched in America, and it holds the distinction as being the last first-party release on Super Nintendo. It came out so late that it just didn't come out to Europe. It first came out there on the Wii Virtual Console. But regardless of its regional distinctions, Kirby's Dream Land 3 has some sublimely gorgeous aesthetics, mixing great painterly visuals with an excellent soundtrack. It's very slow-paced, in line with the other Dreamland games, but it trumps its Game Boy predecessors with its style. The helper co-op mechanic comes back from Superstar, as do the animal friends from Dreamland 2. Persistent throughout the whole game is this playful theme of helping others, as the true final boss can only be faced if you find the character in every stage that needs Kirby's help. The animal friends truly do vary up the way Kirby works, as in addition to traditional copy abilities, Kirby also has 6 different friends for even more abilities, whether it's flying around as Coo the Owl or Pitch the Bird, or swimming as Kind the Fish or Choo Choo the Octopus. Dreamland 3 doesn't quite have as much game as Kirby Superstar, honestly few games do, but the fact both are found on most Super Nintendo things from the past decade means you can just sample 2 fine entries in the Kirby series as a twofer. Just imagine Dreamland 3 as the secret 10th game in Superstar or something. On the Nintendo 64, most Nintendo series had their big fancy 3D adventures. Mario rewrote the rules and Zelda redefined them in Super Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time. Kirby, on the other hand, stayed true to its origins as a 2D platformer. Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards, which is available on Wii U Virtual Console until March 2023, but it is coming in the future to Nintendo Switch Online's expansion pack, the N64 collection there, and I think will probably be up before the Wii U dies. But anyway, Crystal Shards features 3D polygonal visuals, but the gameplay is good old-fashioned 2D platforming fun. The big twist here is fusing copy abilities, which leads to some rad combinations like Spark and Cutter, which seemingly gives you a dual-bladed lightsaber, and if you're keeping score at home as to when this came out, it was like right after Episode 1 The Phantom Menace. It was awesome. You were like Kirby Darth Maul. The overall simplification of what traditional abilities you had access to might have been disappointing, as only 7 are available, but when all of them can be combined together, it adds a lot more depth than you first see at first glance. Aside from that, Kirby 64 occupies a weird space, and that it's more or less a sequel to Kirby's Dream Land 3, a game that was widely less available and played than Kirby Superstar. So if you came from Kirby Superstar all psyched up for Kirby 64, the whole thing is a little off. Much like Dreamland 3, you need to find a crystal shard in each level in order to fight the true final boss, which is well worth it. The final boss is rad, and a culmination of the Dark Matter trilogy that began with Dreamland 2 and continued with Dreamland 3 and ultimately ended in Kirby 64. Next up is the only true portable game from this list. It's Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. After Kirby 64, the little pink fella stayed off home consoles for a long time, outside of spin-offs like the underrated Kirby Air Ride. A lot of the games released in this era are relatively inaccessible outside of Wii U Virtual Console, which, reminder, is shutting down in March 2023. But I did want to call out one game specifically, the experimental Metroidvania-ish Kirby game for GBA called Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. This wasn't the best Kirby game on portables in the 2000s. That crown goes to the touchscreen innovation of Canvas Curse, or maybe the stupendous remake that is Kirby Superstar Ultra. But Amazing Mirror is an ambitious game that works best in a multiplayer setting. The setup is more open-ended than typical Kirby games, taking the labyrinthian ideas of Superstar's Great Cave Offensive, while also mixing in some of Milky Way wishes. It takes a little getting used to. When I first played Amazing Mirror, when it was a 3DS Ambassador game, I bounced off of it very hard. I tried it again recently and enjoyed myself a lot more. An open-ended Kirby game feels even more novel now. Amazing Mirror's best trick is the hardest one to revive though, and that is the 4-player multiplayer. The 2004 local multiplayer mode allowed anywhere between 2 and 4 players to play through the game together, contacting and connecting with each other if they ran into trouble in the game. It has a similar high barrier of entry as Four Swords Adventure, but like the multiplayer 2D Zelda game, Amazing Mirror is electric if you can manage the setup. Amazing Mirror's placement on this list is probably the flimsiest, especially because playing it optimally is a tall order, but it's worth calling out because it's one of the more unique mainline Kirby games ever made. Next up is Kirby's Epic Yarn, which might not technically be a mainline Kirby game, but this is my list, and I love this game. If you doubt me, I've got the receipts to prove it. I reviewed this game back on Wii in the day, and gave it a 10 out of 10. I love Kirby's Epic Yarn. It does hold the distinction of being the first new platformer Kirby game on a home console in a decade. You see, Kirby was only on portables for most of the 2000s, including the likes of the aforementioned Superstar Ultra and Amazing Mirror, as well as good games like Kirby Canvas Curse and garbage like Kirby Squeak Squad. It actually came out in an interview around the release of the 2011 Wii game Kirby's Return to Dreamland that Nintendo and HAL Laboratories were actually working on traditional Kirby games for GameCube, but they never saw the light of day. One of those projects was actually a 3D Kirby platformer, which may be an idea that hung around for a while because maybe it's actually coming to fruition with Kirby and the Forgotten Land. But that's not related to Kirby's Epic Yarn, which originally began as a different project entirely from developer Goodfeel. It was going to star a kind-hearted hero named Prince Fluff, who adventured around a yarny world, jumping around and platforming all cute and stuff. Nintendo, the geniuses that they are, realized they had a hero who jumped around and platformed all cute and stuff, so they partnered with Goodfeel to make Kirby and Prince Fluff co-stars in Kirby's Epic Yarn. It's adorable, and I love it. You can play it on Wii U or Wii, or at least, fleeting moments on Wii U because that store's going down. But there was also a 3DS release, Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn, that I personally think is really disappointing. The port's fine, but the new additions, namely a harder difficulty, really messed with the purity of Epic Yarn as it was. The game doesn't need to be difficult, it just needs to be fun. After Kirby's Return to Dreamland on Wii, the mainline 2D Kirby series had a really strong run, with a pair of excellent games on 3DS, Kirby Triple Deluxe and Kirby Planet Robo-Bo-Bo-Bo-Bo-Bo. Do not remember exactly where the whole Robo-Bo-Bo-Bo comes from, but I've been saying the game name like that for more than half a decade, and I'm not changing anytime soon. It's Kirby Planet Robobot, but Robo-Bo-Bo-Bo-Bo is really fun to say. Anyway, all three of those games are great, and really not that inaccessible, at least until the Wii U and the 3DS, their stores die. But there's still physical releases of all three games. You just need a 3DS or a Wii to check out any of them. But for the purposes of this list of recommendations, I'm going to go with Forgotten Land's predecessor on Switch, Kirby Star Allies. The game came out in early 2018, and was generally viewed as a step back after the 3DS entries. While it definitely doesn't hit the highs of Planet Robo-Bo-Bo-Bo, Star Allies is still an enjoyable game, especially in multiplayer. Admittedly, as a single-player experience, where you are basically forced to have a crew of computer-controlled partners, it's not as good, but in the right situation, it still all clicks. Some of the way Kirby Star Allies fuses abilities and combines powers makes for fun puzzles and amusing sequences. The secret sauce of Star Allies is actually a part of the game that was expanded after launch. There's the idea of Dream Friends, where you can control familiar Kirby characters. At launch, it just had staple stuff like King Dedede and Meta Knight and Bandana Waddle Dee, but a few updates added a wealth of wonderful Kirby cameo content. You could play as Rick, Kine, and Koo, the animal friends from the Dreamland games, or Adeline and Ribbon from Kirby 64. DeRoach, the villain from the miserable game Squeak Squad, shows up, and so does Marx, the villain from Milky Way Wishes and Superstar. For some of these characters, this was the most love they've gotten in literal decades, and the Dream Friends part of Star Allies wind up being a better celebration of the franchise than any anniversary event or thing to date. While Star Allies is not the best Kirby game, it's still a really fun one with a lot of celebratory bonus content. We'll see how Kirby's 30th anniversary is celebrated in Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Maybe we'll even see a Kirby Game & Watch for the anniversary. But regardless of how Kirby celebrates his birthday, I just hope Forgotten Land is a great game, and I hope you enjoyed your time either playing these games or rekindling fond memories. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned. We're going to have more Kirby content. That's content with a K. Just got to do it like that, I guess. Anyway, Forgotten Land's coming out in March. That's exciting. Get hyped. Talk to y'all later. Bye.
This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.